Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 193. I'm Enigmius, and today we're looking at some changes that happened since the last episode. I try and balance the importance of letting you guys see the important stages in the construction of a particular project and just getting things done so that we can move on. And in this case, just getting it done so that we can move on wound up being the case. I hadn't actually intended to make such sweeping changes. I just started working on some ideas and they grew and expanded and wound up being what you see here, which is a lot closer to the front end that I had imagined for this main hull section of our USS Discovery build. As mentioned previously, different episodes in this series, the central hull section that the saucer section and the nacelles all attached to is our own design, just because the game won't let us fit everything that we want to in the space that we're allotted and still have some of the key components to scale the way that I wanted them to. So we're not doing the same exact design for that central hull section, and based on that I decided let's go a little bit nuts and design something that I would be really happy with. And I'm much closer to that after these changes that I've made. So now all we're doing at this point is taking those profiles that we created when we did all those modifications and extending them to wherever they need to go in order for me to feel like they're headed in the right direction, which again, sometimes by the seat of your pants design philosophy winds up being a little bit painful when it requires a lot of changes after the fact in order to bring things in line. Sometimes it works out very easily and doesn't require a lot of reworking, and fortunately in this case it wound up being one of those situations where we end up having to do a little bit of reworking to some of the things just because of how they came together and me wanting them to be a little bit different, and not having to do huge sections of the ship reworked because just no part of it was close to what I had in mind. So now what I'm basically doing, there is a design goal in mind here. One primary goal is that we're trying to bring all of these different angles, all of these different panels together somehow, somewhere, so that they all kind of work towards the back and come together at the shuttle bay opening at the very back of the ship. That's sort of the long-term goal. And in order to do that, I decided that I wanted to have as many extended sort of large panels as I could, just because sometimes it gets a little bit too busy when we have a lot of different angles changing and a lot of different things coming together all at once. They maybe don't fit together as well as we would like them to, and that becomes sort of a problem in of itself. Just the way that your eye falls on it and you recognize that that's maybe not great. It's not very good. So despite the fact that I made a number of changes to the front of the ship and gave it a lot more dimension and a lot of curves and angles and different profiles that weren't there before, it's actually working out to be much simpler to work with because I brought them all together in large sheets and panels. This whole business of using these outside corners to do these compound 22.5 degree angle sections, I'm kind of getting a feel for it. No matter what you do, it's never going to be a perfectly flat panel, and that's something that I have to keep in mind, and I have to decide if having it go in a particular direction and having little notches out of it all over the place is justified by the direction that it goes and how it fits together with the rest of the panels. And in this case, I feel it's definitely justified having it set up the way that it is and working the way that it is. It's doing its job, and it's not going to be such a huge part that it's going to be like an ongoing distraction. You could probably get away with having it as sort of like a texture design element where you look at it and it's got sort of a pattern that's going on for it in a particular area of the ship. And as long as we don't have it all over the place, then it can work out. Now, the one thing, this is one of the areas where we're starting to look at a potential rework already, is not so much that panel with the outside corners, but the one that we're working on now. You see where it's got that one strip where it's got a couple of sloped blocks to 22.5 degree slope, and then it's got like a cube, like a 90 degree face, and then it goes back to the slope blocks. Those are some of the transitions that just on the surface bug me. I prefer not to have them if I can avoid it. And this is one of those situations where I decided to just kind of roll with it to see where we would end up in terms of the angle that we were creating by having that extra block in there. And ultimately, it bugged me too much. It bugged me way too much. Now, one of the things that exists on the main hull of the Discovery, the actual Discovery, is there's a section where there are a bunch of strips where you can see it lit in blue, and it's just like this narrow. It's actually not even really that narrow. It's just a bunch of stacked strips on the side of the main hull where you can see this blue light, and it adds something to the design of the ship. And it was definitely something that I wanted to incorporate in some way into what we're doing here. And you'll see that come together on the side of the ship. Instead of horizontal strips, they'll be vertical. And I didn't get around to lighting them this time around, but I'm going to make a point of having that done for the next episode so that you guys can kind of see where it's headed. And now you can see here we're reworking that panel to get rid of that strip of blocks. I just decided I would rather have it smooth, 22.5 degrees, doing what it needs to do, and get rid of that strip in the middle. Ultimately, I'm pretty happy with that decision to do that, to take a little bit of extra time now and kind of make the correction before we get too far, because one of two things was going to have to happen if I continued. I was going to have to duplicate that pattern where we have the flat section and then the two 22.5 degree sections, and then another flat and then another two 22.5 degrees. Or I was going to have to switch to just all 22.5 degrees and leave that little strip in there, which would have looked absolutely terrifying. Or remove it, swap things around, make it come together a little bit in a more unified way, and then we can move on and be happy with what we're producing, which is kind of the central theme related to this episode, is just fixing things and getting to the point where we're happy with them so that we can move on. And here, it's just another example of how quickly things can go. Even though we have to switch between 4 different specific block shapes to make these compound 22.5 degree panels like this, I'm getting in the hang of thinking in terms of using a particular block as many times as I can before I switch to another one, and getting more built for the time that I have with each individual block, which not only actually saves quite a bit of time in the building process, but of course saves me time in the editing process, getting rid of all of those pesky block selection menus. But what we've got here is sort of like what I was talking about, having these individual panels and looking at them and deciding what I would like them to be and whether or not they're up to snuff or not. In this particular example, you can see that this little triangular wedge-shaped panel that's comprised out of these outside corner blocks with that texture, all those little notches out of it, it comes to a natural end. It comes to a point, and then we're done with it. This here is the area where we're going to have the lights. Just as a side note, this is where we're going to be lighting it up so that you can just see the blue glow from between these openings. And try and do it. I've done similar kind of lighting effects in the past for different ships, where you basically bounce the light off of an inside wall so that you can see the glow off of that wall from outside the ship. So it's not complicated, it's not difficult to do. The one thing that I've given a certain amount of thought to is, because of the size of the ship and the limits in the draw distance for lighting effects, it's entirely possible that during a flyby of the ship, say you've got the ship spawned and you decide to go from the front all the way to the back looking at the side as you go, that you'll see all of these sections of this ship, the lights turn on and off as you get closer and farther away, which I'm hoping won't be too distracting, but it's deceptive just how large the ship really is until you get those views from a distance and start realizing that the game is not actually drawing everything because it's too far away. It doesn't think it has to. You can't see that far. You don't care what's happening that far away, even though it's all part of the exact same ship. So we're working through the transitions here, and everything is going about as good as I could possibly hope, given what we're trying to do. Once I kind of started to get a handle on what was going on this underside, which is basically what we're working on. You don't necessarily recognize it by looking at it that it's the underside because there's so many different angles at play. But the thought occurred to me that we also have the top side of the ship, and we spent all that time trying to get a fairly accurate reproduction of the curve on that support arm that's holding the sphere in the middle of the saucer section as it transitions back towards the main hull of the ship. And now that we're doing our own main hull design, we have to figure out how we're going to integrate that particular structural element into the finished design. I don't want to just kind of rush it, kind of jam it into place. But one of the other things that I noticed as I was getting towards the end of recording this segment is just how far forward the front of the main hull section is relative to the saucer section. It's actually almost a quarter of the way, I think, is what I was looking at it, and I was trying to figure it out in my head. But it's basically almost completely covering the outer disc, the part that it comes across, and almost extending to the point where it's starting to cover the inner disc when it stops and it starts kind of going the other way, which is to be completely honest, quite a bit farther forward than I had originally had in mind. I had mostly had it in mind that the deflector dish would be kind of in a position behind the saucer section. But I just got so caught up in my enthusiasm for making the ellipsoid that it got pushed a little bit farther forward. I don't mind, actually. I think it's got this really aggressive, stocky, it's got this beefy kind of look to it, which I think is very, very fitting. If you've seen this series, you know that if they were to remake this ship, the NCC-1031B, it would probably be a little bit beefier and a little bit more robust than its original namesake, just because of the tasks that it's being assigned to. That having been said, no spoilers. Just let you guys watch it in your own good time if you haven't seen it yet. So now we've got this top section we're working on. We're kind of filling in the underside where the main hull is going to sort of converge on the top side of it. It's got a little bit of work that we did where it kind of rides the profile of the discs in the saucer section, and then as it comes up in behind the outer disc, that's where we need to start looking at that main central transition between the support arm and the main hull. So there's going to be a little bit of thought that goes into that between now and the next episode, and exactly how I want to make that happen. But I think we're in a really, really good spot with it now, where we can make decisions based on what we want to see, and everything's already in place that we can just kind of move forward with those things. We don't have to worry about reworking anything in order for that to happen. You can see this area here is sort of that last stretch that we're working through before we get clear of the saucer section. So it's got a lot of different angles, a lot of different pieces sort of coming together in an area that makes sense for them to do so, but trying to also keep in mind that I don't want it to get too complicated because then it just gets kind of gaudy. And relative to everything else that we've been doing, keeping the panels large and just kind of having everything come together very cleanly and working on things from that point of view is definitely something I want to continue with this section. So the next episode, we're going to pick up exactly where we left off. We're going to be working on that main hull section. We're going to get as far as we can with it in the time allotted, and then we'll continue. We'll just be moving on, hopefully at this pace, because we got a lot done this episode. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes in this and other series, as always, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel and or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. There's a little under a minute left, I think. You can just kind of watch finishing it out. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.